Hi, and welcome to another episode of Apprentice Time with Rainy Bonsai. Today, I'm going to be preparing my entries for my club show coming up at the start of next month. If you're in the Denver area, please swing by the Botanical Garden August 31st and September 1st to check out the 55th exhibition that's being put on by the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society. There's going to be lots of cool trees there, and I like to think that the local community is pretty robust and takes pride in showing off trees at all skill levels, from pro to your first tree. It's very welcoming, and it would mean a lot to me, and I'm sure a lot of the other local artists, if you came, checked out the show that weekend. This will actually be my second time showing something in the local club show. I've chosen this spruce forest and the Shohin ponderosa because I think they're great representations of how I have grown as an artist over the last year. Now, I've chosen the pairings that I did simply because the Kusamono there are in matching pots. We'll talk about those as we go along. This spruce forest is one of my favorite pairings in my collection. I think it really encapsulates my time with the club. This tree here, the first time I went, Jennifer Price was actually giving feedback on how she would develop a particular tree over the course of a year. And her advice was put this in a forest. So I acquired some more nursery spruce and planned for that. And I ended up going to a forest planting workshop put on by my local chapter of the Purple Pot Society. That's where I got this awesome slab, by the way. It was made by a local artist named Linda Paul. And Linda was also kind enough to give me two of the trees that are in this forest, just so that it didn't just look like a lot of young baby nursery trees. The two that she gave me were two that she had collected. I want to say it was this one and this one. About a month ago, I did come through and remove some wire that was starting to bite, mostly thinner gauges, and I've just kind of been letting it sit. But now I'm going to come through, pull out some of those needles that are starting to brown, and maybe put some more wire on in a couple spots. But since this is going into a show, I want to kind of minimize the wire to the extent I can. Okay, so I've got my tweezers. I'm just going to start plucking. Now I do want to leave as much of this untouched as I can, because I don't want a bunch of bald spots, but especially where this old growth is starting to brown at the end of summer here, just gonna go ahead and help that along so it's less of an eyesore. Yeah, so I did the planting itself at with the Purple Pot Society, and it ended up being vigorous enough that summer, when I started working for Todd Schlafer, this was kind of the first thing I worked on with his supervision. And I'm pretty proud of this planting. Now, it definitely has a ways to go, but I think it is a nice reflection of the community I've found within the bonsai society here. So today I'm actually recording in my new home studio. Part of why I haven't put out any videos lately is because I've kind of been trying to get this up and going, and it wasn't quite working out the way I had planned. So I'm gonna look into maybe some better lighting than what I've got to make things easier as time goes on, but for now, this is what I've got to work with. As I'm coming through plucking some of these old needles, I'm trying to really look at the tree, think about, is there anything that would be better off removed? For instance, there's a real weak branch here. It doesn't have any buds and it looks like it's dying off. So I'm likely to remove it, bring this back to fill in that space. So when I styled it, I thought my front was somewhere through here, but I think I kind of like that other side better. So right now I'm kind of debating, do I show it this way? And I will say, through my screen at least, I think I like this front better, but there's something about looking at the other side in person I find compelling. I'm just gonna think about that for a moment. I do think that this is ultimately the more compelling front. I decided to go ahead and remove the weak side branch that was coming off of this branch. And I've decided the only bit of wire I'm gonna do here is just gonna be cleaning up the outside of this pad. Trying to wire with all my camera gear in the way here is actually surprisingly tough. I am trying to be careful not to crush any needles. Where I can, I'm weaving through. Otherwise, if I have to pluck a couple, so be it. This area right here feels a little weird to me, so I'm gonna bring that down, bring it closer to the trunk that way. Here's the kusamono I'm going to show with that tree. It's just some native sedums, 2 different types, and then a hen and chick. They're in a matching pot, also made by Linda Paul. And really all I'm going to do for this is clean up some of the old leaves, and I'm going to put down just a little bit of top dressing so that it looks a little more presentable. Now, I'm not going to remove all of the dead leaves because they do kind of add to the feeling of age. I want it cleaned up a hair though. So I'm just going for the ones that feel like an eyesore. And I've got some top dressing here. I do have this for sale if you're interested. I have both long fiber as well as shredded. Now I do hand make it myself, which means The shredded in particular does come at a bit of a premium just because of the time it takes to make this. This particular batch, I was playing with what I hoped would be more of a loam color. Try and emulate that deep, dark dirt that I see up in the mountains. So a lot of these plants are common in xeriscaping locally. That's actually kind of why I chose them, because I did want something that would be able to go a little longer between waterings. So I ended up going with just succulents. I figured the pots themselves feel pretty, let's say, industrial, modern, like they're obviously concrete. So I think instead of trying to pretend that it's not, I just wanted to kind of embrace the fact that, I should use something you would see in someone's yard. Like around here, seeing Colorado blue spruce in a yard is incredibly common. And in particular, I tend to see it a lot with sedums and the chicks and hen. And so it just kind of seemed like an intuitive pairing. I'm a big fan of these pots. They are the Arakawa Ash Splashed pots. I got them from Bonsai Fi. Um, and I'm really a big fan of these little pots for Kusamono and Shohin trees. They have a lot of great texture to them, which I appreciate. This rock I will absolutely be using as part of the display. I found it up in the mountains and I just think it looks really cool. The area I was in had a lot of ponderosas, so I figured it's probably fine on that front alone. And everything in here as well comes from the mountains in an area where there were ponderosas going. I could not begin to identify what all's in here, but I do think it's a fun little composition. Now for these, I think I'm just going to clean up the base, but otherwise I want to leave them how they are. I'm pretty happy with these. Now it does look like some kind of critter was messing around in the root ball of this tree. There's like a little hole that's blown out and looks like something was rooting in there. So I'm just going to pack that area with some top dressing. And we have another patch over here where, again, I think a bird or something was poking around in this tree. I noticed all of the holes maybe a week ago, and it occurred in one other tree, so the only thing that really makes sense to me is that something was rooting around trying to find a tasty bug or two. Now I'm using the flat end of my spatula here just to try and get a nice little rim. So it looks just a hair less overgrown. Yeah, so the top dressing that's on here is actually the same stuff. I just initially made that batch a little lighter in color. But it was all seeded with some of my local moss. And after 4 months, you can see it's turned this amazingly vibrant green. It'll take a little bit longer for that native moss to fully colonize. But for right now, I think it's off to a great start. Okay, I'm going to water this in and then retuck the moss so that it's nice and form-fitting. But before I go and do that, Just gonna come to the little kusamono here. And just clean up the lip of the pot. Okay, I'm gonna go water the tree, and then when I come back, we'll clean the pots and call it good. All right, the trees are outside draining, so I'm gonna go ahead and start cleaning the companion plants. I've got just a bowl of olive oil here and an old rag. I'm just got it wrapped around two of my fingers. Gonna get a little olive oil, don't want to go crazy. I'm gonna start buffing it in. Make sure to get the lip of the pot. Now, I'm doing this so that it helps knock off some of the calcium, but also it's gonna give the pot a nice, sleek look when it's on display. Help some of the contrast pop. I don't know about you guys, but my city water is pretty hard, and that's with it going into a filtration system before it even hits the trees. So I do have lots of calcium buildup on my pots. You might not, but coming through and polishing your pots before show, especially the unglazed ones, is always a good move. Glazed pots, you don't really have to unless you want to knock off some of that calcium. But on unglazed, it really helps revitalize the pot. And I'm making sure to do this a couple weeks before the show so it has plenty of time to soak in and doesn't look wet and greasy going in. But it will maintain its vibrancy. Set that one aside. And I'm going to come through, do it again with this other pot. Now this is concrete with some dye or paint on it. I'm not entirely sure which. So I don't know that I have to do this, but I do think that the calcium deposits are pretty detracting. So I'm just trying to give it a quick clean, or a clean, maybe not quick. Now I do expect this pot to want a little bit more olive oil than the other one did, just because it has so many nooks and crannies. But it's still not a particularly laborious or long process. Just making sure to buff it. I don't want to leave any puddles in the cracks. Now I am a little partial to this particular planting just because it's the first kusamono I did. And, you know, it's all just cuttings and clippings I was able to find with very little effort. This is very urban. This is what I would see if I was walking around town in people's yards. But the same can be said for spruce trees around here. And I often see them in the same yards, so I just thought it would be a nice pairing. Okay, so now that I've gotten that all in, I'm looking at it and there's definitely some puddling. So I've come over to a dry spot of my cloth. I'm gonna come through, just try to dap up some of the excess. Oops. Looks like I didn't get through here too well, so I'm just redistributing some of that excess oil. into this little area. And I think I'm going to call that Kusamono good. I'm going to come through, do the same thing with this other Arakawa ash splash. Making sure to get the feet. One thing I'm doing is I'm holding it in my hand and rotating it in the light, which is helping me to see a little bit better what areas have gotten the oil, which ones haven't. Okay, and now I'm going back to the dry part of my cloth. I'm just going to get up any of this excess oil. Now this is a lot less textured than the other pot, so I don't feel that I have to dab into any crevices here. I'm just dragging the cloth along and letting any excess come along with it. Last but certainly not least, I'm gonna get the spruce forest. It's kind of crazy to me just how alive this slab is becoming as I'm applying the vegetable oil. Doesn't look like the camera's showing it too well, but calcium buildup is real bad on this side. I mean, just look at this contrast. My last little area here, I definitely see a contrast between the spots that have been polished and the spots that haven't. But getting these calcium deposits out of here, I think has really helped with just elevating the planting. You know, I was on the fence about whether or not this would look better being polished because I don't know the difference between dyed concrete and glazes. But I think this pot just looks so much fresher now that we've gone through this. Okay, now that this is done, I'm going to take one last look at everything and think about how I'm going to display these. I definitely don't have a good enough stand for the spruce and the succulents and the Linda Paul pots. So I think those are ultimately going to get a nice cloth. But I do need to get some pictures taken and fired off so that I can get them submitted in time to be shown at the 53rd exhibition for the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society. Thank you so much for following along with me today. Thank you so much for following along with me today while I was preparing my submissions for my club show. Again, if you're in Denver on August 31st and September 1st, please swing by the Denver Botanical Gardens and check out our exhibition. It's a pretty fun event. There will be lots of us coming and going throughout the day from the local club, as well as just people from the larger community, and